Hi, my name is Joelle Piercy. I'm the Speak Outreach and Education Coordinator at Safe and Sound Somerset. Every day we offer hope and healing to survivors of domestic abuse. But we wanted to talk a little bit more about how the 1 year anniversary of COVID might be impacting the wider population, and how different people might be experiencing these complex emotions of grief and loss, but also of hope. So today I'm sitting here with Reverend Linda Owens from the Bound Brook Presbyterian Church, who partners with us providing services and support for families in Bound Brook. And so, Linda, I wanted to talk to you today. I know that in your position, you walk with so many people through different stages of their life every day. And so I just wanted to be able to bring some of your experience and knowledge into this conversation about grief, but also hope.
So thanks for letting me be here. It's an honor to be here. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Well, thank you so much again for joining us. So I wanted to first ask, what might the loss and grief look like about now with the result of the COVID pandemic?
Well, as I'm sure you know, there are no rules. There are no rules. So it can look different in just about each and every one of us. I think there is an issue of isolation, there's an issue of fear, there's an issue of loss, there's concern for the kids or the grandkids. So this whole experience of COVID can really express itself in a variety of ways. It can be anger at the loss of time with loved ones, or anger at the loss of loved ones and being unable to appropriately grieve. All our rituals for grieving in the past year have been suspended. So the tools that helped us manage grief in loss, have been taken from us for a time. So that suspended period of no ritual, no gathering, isolation is bound to wreak havoc on folks. I think some folks are concerned about their kids and what's happening to them at this time. Kids who loved school are withdrawing. Other kids are acting out, and some are kind of closing themselves up in their room, and they're not flipping Zoom on and not going to their classes or not doing the things that they would normally do. And we're all concerned about what that means for them in their future.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That really resonates, this idea of that there are no rules anymore. Everything's changed about how we typically deal with this. That being said, there might be something similar. And I think that people do have a tendency to say, well, I didn't experience a loss of a loved one, so maybe I'm not experiencing real loss or real grief. So what are some signs that someone might be experiencing grief or loss, even if they don't necessarily think about it that way?
Yeah, it's a good question, because you're right. Many of us have been touched by loss during COVID, due to COVID, but just as many or more have not, or only tangentially. So what might it look like? I think there are all sorts of signs of grief. I think there is the numbing to the pain of others, which is a sign of grief itself. Kind of denying that this pandemic has been as awful as the media's made it out to be. I didn't lose anyone, I'm fine. Some of that self-talk sometimes masks some of the fear that we harbor. I think guilt can express itself in anger, in a variety of ways. Anger towards our loved ones, just because we don't have any other place to put it. Even anger toward our own selves, things that might have given you joy in 2019, maybe no longer give you joy anymore. Maybe you're not doing the things that you loved doing, and for a year you've put them aside, and you can't pick up your artwork or your music or find joy in a walk outside because, if you dig down deep, there's a fear or a concern, depression, just finding it hard to get up in the morning. There are plenty of folks who are finding it hard right now to get up in the morning, to find joy in their work or to find meaning in their work, particularly if their work has changed or, God forbid, they've lost their job, right? So there are all of the economic and financial pressures that COVID has imposed on folks. And so if you haven't been touched by those things, you've been blessed to keep your job, you've been blessed that no one in your inner circle has gotten severely ill or died, you may feel removed. But you also may find that you have anger or fear about this looming potential. We are seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, but our numbers are rising. When we're tired and we're weary and we've had enough. For some folks, that may present itself in taking chances, letting our guard down. I don't know that that's a sign of grief, but it's certainly a sign of exhaustion. I've heard people call it COVID fatigue, like we've just had enough already. I think it also I think it's important to address that it may affect how we relate to one another. I think our fuses have gotten shorter and we have begun to be less compassionate about the care and concerns of others. So if you're comfortable being out and about with, a walk in the park without your mask and somebody else is masked all up and being super careful, I've heard lots of folks report being made fun of for their own precautions. And I think that's a sign I think there's some grief in that. I think there's some anger. I think there's just all these feelings bubbling up on the surface.
Yeah, and we're all just trying to find our own ways to be safe in these times of just complete uncertainty. So those are all good things. I think good reminders, to be mindful of how we're reacting, and really still, even though we might feel disconnected from the pandemic and the crisis, it still is impacting just everything and how we're existing right now. Absolutely. So as we start getting, as more vaccines are coming, as some numbers are going down somewhere, they're rising other places still. But, with this idea of the vaccines and kind of talking about the future, there is beginning to be this talk of like, oh, things are going to get back to normal. Expect to get back to normal soon. So what does it mean to get back to normal after a time of different loss and grief?
Can I tell you, in a year? I mean, who knows? That's the thing. So here at the church, we just constituted a small group of leaders to talk about and anticipate the new normal. I think that's the best phrase. I know that we, as human beings, we're prone to nostalgia, even short term, looking back to a year, before we had to take to the masks and isolate at home, and we're all, kind of anxious to get back to eating in the restaurants and going to the movies and having concerts and going to sports and doing, send kids back to school. We're anxious for all those things. And I think that, clearly they're going to happen, but we're going to be changed, I think, from this experience. And that's not all bad. So I think being resilient requires flexibility. And I am hoping that we will have created an increased compassion and flexibility with one another, that we might be more careful, that we might be more tender with those that we find living in the after effects of their grief and depression that are pandemic related. I think we'll be supporting and loving and holding up a number of individuals who will find it hard to move past this year-long plus experience. So, I hope that folks are prepared for a sense of patience and a new normal. And we won't really know what it is. The other day, I officiated a wedding. It was a beautiful experience, very small group of people. For the actual ceremony, we let the participants take their masks off, just the leaders and the folks in the bridal party. And somebody coughed. I felt it. I felt like, oh my gosh, what does that mean? What's in that cough? What's in those droplets? I think there's a little bit of shell shock that we'll experience. You know, you'll walk through the aisles at the supermarket, somebody will sneeze an aisle over, and you'll be like, wait, were they wearing a mask? Should they be? So it's going to be an interesting experience moving out of this pandemic. And I'm not sure that we can count on exactly what that experience will be.
Yeah, there's a lot of intersection, you know, the work we do and the trauma, right? And the body really remembers trauma and fear. So I think some of those physical reactions, I think, are going to surprise us. I know I get nervous when I watch movies and there's lots of people close together. I don't know how long that's going to be, but I think also with this idea of trauma, you know, when you think about this collective trauma, and as you were saying, this chance to really create a new normal, and you know, that is part of the healing of collective trauma, is coming up with a new group identity. And we're really at this crossroads where we can really begin to define how we want that new identity to look like. So that's a neat viewpoint.
I hope we pick compassion,
yeah,
as opposed to division, because we're prone to both, right? But we have seen some really beautiful examples of first responders and the gifts and the risks that they've taken to keep us safe. Our angels that we're talking about today that are, you know, manning their computers and making sure that we get our appointments and giving of their technological skills. There are some really beautiful things happening. And I hope we hold on to those and foster more of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, bringing it down to, you know, the more the individual and someone who might be experiencing some of the things that we've been talking about. What are some strategies or tips that you have that would help promote healing after loss or after a time of fear?
I think, again, it's a good reminder to tell folks that everybody grieves differently and there's no right way. No right way. I think the most dangerous way is to shove it deep down in and ignore it. So let's say off the bat that if it is grief or anxiety or depression, you know, the first and most important tool in the toolbox is to acknowledge it. And then the second, to me, most important thing is to make sure that you rely on and lean on the community that you've created around yourself, whether it's your family or your friends or safe and sound community or a faith community, whether it is a professional community, whether it is, you know, finding a group opportunity where people of similar experiences come, support groups and things like that. There's no substitute for the power of community. And I know that some of us in our most vulnerable places are hesitant to share those vulnerabilities. But that's where the good stuff happens. It happens when we have the courage to say, I need help. So, you know, if the first is acknowledgement and the second is community, then the third is, for me, being sure that you feel you have the permission to ask for what you need. Right? Not everybody needs the same thing. And a good example with grief is somebody loses somebody in their family, somebody that they are grieving. And often friends tiptoe around that grief and try not to bring it up. Don't say the name. And for some people, all they want are people to say the name of their loved one so that they feel that connection and so that that person feels continually present, not only to them. It's very isolating when no one will talk to you about the person you've loved and lost. So to those outside the grief experience who haven't lost someone, but are walking with somebody who has, one of the best things you can do is to ask that person, what do you need? Do you want to talk about Joe? Do you want to look at pictures? Can I pray for you? Can I just sit there in silence with you? Do you need a meal or a ride to an event? What is it that would be most helpful to you in this time? And if you're the one who is experiencing that grief or depression, beginning to put words to the things that you need. Do you need to throw plates at the wall? Do you need to go to Stumpy's and throw an axe? Whatever it is, figure out what you need and then ask for it. And then creating space for ritual. COVID has limited, again, our ability to grieve. It's taken away, the opportunity to gather in large numbers. Although now I know at our cemetery across the street, you can have an unlimited number of mourners as long as they're masked and appropriately distanced from one another. So that's easing. But there are plenty of folks who lost people in the spring or summer or fall of last year who have yet to get together with their loved ones and really remember and celebrate the life lost. I'm a pastor. I'm going to tell you, foster your faith in whatever it is. But there is nothing quite like the power of a belief system to hold you up. So.
Absolutely. And I'm going to switch things up a little bit here. I hope you don't mind. It's because it's interesting because I'm hearing a lot of what you're saying, and it's a lot of what we talk to about survivors with. You have every right to acknowledge the pain, where so often it's dismissed. People don't believe it. That power of naming what it is. I experienced abuse is life-changing, really, to give that a name. And it's the same thing, find someone to talk to. And for people who are concerned about a loved one in an abusive relationship, ask them what they need, approach them and let them decide, what it is and identify what they need for their own healing journey. So I'm hearing a lot of these similar themes here.
So there are two ways that we can err when we walk with somebody. We can fail to acknowledge or enter into somebody's grief by asking them what they need. And on the other end, we can think we can fix it and we can get in with all our tools and try to make it better. Grief takes time. And again, there's no timeline. So what it takes you to heal from your experience might not be the same as it takes, your neighbor down the street. So the person in the grieving moment or in the depressive moment or in the abusive situation needs to steer the boat. They need to be empowered to, navigate their own recovery.
Absolutely. So as we close, a little bit, I do want to just kind of touch on this idea of it can be really hard to reconcile the hopefulness that we're beginning to feel, but also this ongoing crisis. So how can we hold space for grief and loss and crisis, and yet still allow ourselves the hopefulness and the optimism?
Oh, how long have you got? No, I think there are moments in the grieving process where that feels impossible. And faith, whether it's religious faith or just faith in humanity or faith in the cycle of things, tells us that death, whether it's a death of relationship or a death of an individual or a death of a circumstance, that life always follows death. I love that we're in the spring right now and we're seeing light at the end of the tunnel, because we're fortunate in this part of the globe to have that spring experience. We had a truckload of snow this winter, and I can still see some when I'm driving from my house to the church. There are still little piles that are surviving that remind us, of what we call the dead of winter. But now the crocuses are coming up and things are happening. And that isn't to diminish loss. It is to say that there are ways to move forward, that we believe that the world moves toward good and that we are worthy of good, that we are worthy of joy. I think at some point you have to say to yourself, I am worthy of happiness. And I've lost somebody I care about, or I am still climbing out of the pain of isolation that I've been in for a year. But there is so much possibility. I can love the ones I've lost by caring for their memory and living their legacy. I can learn that life is fragile, and so it's precious. So the best way to honor somebody that I have lost is to live fully and to take them and their memory along with me in that living. And I think when you start to see, you know, part of that, I guess the aside is, the other thing I want to mention is that you take your pain, and when you start to feel the upswing, then your story becomes the hand up to somebody else who's hurting, right? So redemption in these moments comes when we start to get to the other side, and we can be the voice of encouragement to say, I don't know when it's going to happen, but it can get better. There are good days that will follow these days.
Mm-hmm. That is, you know, just so powerful. And, you know, it seems that that just really sums up the whole conversation we've been having today. So I really want to thank you just so much, Linda. The information you shared was just so insightful and really thoughtful, and I hope provides some hope and information for someone in the community. So for more information about the Bound Brook Presbyterian Church, you can visit online bbpc.org, right?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. They're worshiping online, but also leave on the front lawn for Easter. So looking for that community. So here at Safe and Sound Somerset, we believe survivors of domestic abuse and their safety and healing stands at the center of all we do. If you are struggling with domestic violence, or know someone or care about someone who's struggling for domestic violence, Safe and Sound Somerset can help. You can call our 24/7 hotline at 866-685-1122 or go to safe-sound.org for additional information. And I just want to echo your words, you know, Reverend Owens, for everyone here today, you are worthy. You are worthy of happiness, of safety, and of good times ahead. So thank you so much again for being here, for allowing us a space to talk about grief, but also allowing us a space for building hope and compassion for each other.
It was a privilege to be here, Joelle. Thanks.
Thank you again.